Jai Hind everyone, I am Dr. Neha Singh, Assistant Professor in CSC Department at Akgec Engineering College. Today we discuss the topic Artificial Neural Networks. So first we know what is the artificial neural network. So artificial neural network is a computer system that inspired by the human brain, and it learns the patterns from the data. So artificial neural network basically contains artificial neurons, which are called units, and these units are arranged in a series of layers that together constitute the whole artificial neural network in a system. So basically artificial neural network consists of three layers: input layer, hidden layer, and output layer. All the layers are interconnected to each other, and input layer passes through the weight to the hidden layer, and hidden layer passes to the weight to the output layer, and all the weights are interconnected to each other. So these units are arranged in series of layers that together constitute the whole layer artificial neural network in a system. So basically a layer can have only a dozen units or a millions of units, as this depends on how the complex neural network will be required to learn the hidden patterns in the data sets. So basically artificial neural network has a three layers: input layer, an output layer, as well as hidden layer. So input layer basically receives the data from the outside world, which the neural network needs to analyze or learn the data, or learn about the pattern or the data. So then this data passes through one or multiple hidden layers that transform the input data that into the valuable for the output layer, and finally the output layer provides an output from the responses of the artificial neural network to the input data provided. So basically in artificial neural network, majority of neural network units are interconnected from one layer to another layer, and each of these layer connection has a weight that determines the influence of one unit on another unit. As the data transform from one unit to another unit, the neural network learns more and more about the data, which eventually results in an output from these from the output layer. So artificial neural network basically have three layers: input layer, hidden layer, and output layer, and all these layers are interconnected with each other. So the structure and operation of human neurons serves as the basis for artificial neural network, and it is also known as the neural networks or neural nets. So basically the input layer of artificial neural network is the first layer, and it receives input from external sources and releases it to the hidden layer, which is second layer. And the hidden layer, each neuron receives data from the input and previous layer of the neuron and compute the weighted sum and send it to the next layer, and next layer which is the output layer. And then output layer process the data and produce the result of that data. Here the figures of the artificial neural network. Here the shells are denotes the dendroids, nucleus, cell body, axons, and produces, and all these are connected to each other and produces the output. And so this is the basic form of the input layer. Some weights and bias are assigned, then linear activation function, and then output is produced. Then next is, how do artificial neural network learn? So basically artificial neural network is trained using the training set. And for example, like suppose you want to teach artificial neural network to recognize a cat picture. So artificial neural network shows the thousands of different images of cat, so the network can learn to identify the cat. Once the neural network has trained the data using these images of cat, then you need to check it and can identify cat images correctly. So artificial neural network basically learn from the data, or learn from the pattern from the data, then recognize this is a cat or another images. Types of artificial neural networks. So basically artificial neural network is a 4 types. First is the feed-forward neural network, and feed-forward neural network is the one of the most basic artificial neural network in the neural network. And in feed-forward neural network, there is the data or the input provided travels in a single direction, and it enters into the artificial neural network through the input layer existing through the output layer, while hidden layer may or may not exist. So the feed-forward neural network has a front propagated web only and usually does not have a back propagation. Second is the convolutional neural network. Convolutional neural network basically used for the image recognitions, and where the connections between the units have the weight that determines the influence one unit on another units. But a CNN has one or more than one convolutional layer that uses the convolutional operations on the input and the passes to the result obtained from the output to the next layer. So CNN basically used for the speech recognition, image processing, which is a particularly useful in computer vision. Next is the radial bias function or neural network. So basically, radial bias function are those functions that consider the distance of point connections concerning the center. So radial bias functions have two layers. In the first layer, the input layer is mapped into the radial bias function in the hidden layer, and the output layer computes the output in the next step. So basically, radial bias function normally used to the model that represent any underlying trend or functions. Next type is a recurrent neural network. Recurrent neural network basically the extended form of LSTM, long short-term memory. In this layer, the saves the output of the layer as the feeds this output back to the input to the better predictions and the outcome of the of that layer. The first layer in the recurrent neural is quite similar to the feed forward neural network and the recurrent neural network. Our next topic is a perceptron. So perceptron is basically first invented by the Frank Rosenfeld in 1958, and it is an algorithm that is used to learn the binary classification known as threshold function. So in a perceptron, it is basically used to separate the two classes in a linear classifier. So perceptron is an algorithm and that is used for the supervised learning for binary classifier. Binary classifier are essentially a function that has ability to determine whether as input is presented by a vector belong to the particular class. So perceptron, the basic idea of the perceptron is rooted into two words. First is the perceptrons, which means the ability to sense something, and the neurons, which means nerve cells in the brain that transform sensory input into the meaningful information. So basically perceptron has four parts. First is the input values are one input layer. So the numerical input values correspond to the feature. Next is a weight and bias. So every feature has a weight assigned to it to determine its importance, and this bias allow you to shift the activation function curve upwards and downwards. Then next is the net sum. So net sum is basically this is the output that is calculated using input and weights. And next is the activation function, which is basically used for non-linear function that is used for mapping the purpose of input between the required values like 0, 1 or -1 to 1. So perceptron is basically a building block of artificial neural network and essentially a simplified model of biological models that exist in the brain. So there has been research that demonstrate that the linear model like perceptron can be capable of producing some behavior that is seen in real neurons. Here the picture of the perceptron. Some input weights are given, some weights are given, here weighted some value are given, and step functions then compute the step function and produce the output value. Now next is what are the types of perceptron. Basically a perceptron is two types, single layer perceptron and multi-layer perceptron. In a single layer perceptron can only learn linearly separable and does not contain any hidden layers. In a single layer perceptron, input nodes are fully connected to node or multiple nodes in the succeeding layer, and nodes in the next layer takes the weighted sum of their inputs. Second is a multi-layer perceptron. So in a multi-layer perceptron have the greatest processing power, and they are a class of feed-forward neural network, and they have a hidden layer and use a sophisticated algorithms like backpropagation. So in a multi-layer perceptron, a set of output from a set of inputs. So multi-layer perceptron consists of input layer, output layer, and also contains hidden layers. So each hidden layer is made of a numerous perceptron, which are known as the hidden layers or hidden units. Now next is why we use the perceptron. So perceptron is basically used for classifying the data into two sections, and that's why it is known as a linear binary classifier. And the perceptron algorithm basically allow the neurons to learn and process elements in the training set at a time. Then next is how does perceptron work? Basically, the three step the perceptron is a work. It multiply all the input values with their given weights, and then all the multiplied value are added, and this sum is known as the weighted sum. And after that weighted sum is applied to the appropriate activation function, and now produce the result or output. Now our next topic is a multilayer perceptron. So basically multilayer perceptron is a type of feed-forward neural network consisting of fully connected neuron with a non-linear kind of activation function, and it is widely used to distinguish data into non-linearly separable. So multilayer perceptron is widely used in various fields, including image recognition, natural language processing, image recognition, and many more fields. So their flexibility in architecture and ability to appropriately function under certain conditions make them a fundamental building block in deep learning and neural network research. Here the working of multilayer perceptron layer by layer. Here input layers, given the input layer, some of the hidden layer and output layer, and all these layers are connected to each other, and also bias are given, and all the input layer, hidden layers, weights are given, bias are also given, and all these layers are interconnected and give input layer process to the hidden layer process to the output layer. Working of first the input layer. So input layer of multilayer perceptron receives input which could be feature extracted from the input samples in dataset, and each neuron in the input layer represents one feature. So basically neuron in the input layer perform any computations that simplify process the input values to the neurons into the next layer. So second layer is a hidden layer. So hidden layer of multilayer perceptron consists of interconnected neurons that perform computation of the input data, and it processes the input data it receives the input layer receives input from all the neurons in the previous layer. So basically the input layer are multiplied by the corresponding weights denoted as W, and the weight determine how much influence the input from one neuron has one of the another neuron. So how to compute the weighted sum is the summation of I equal to 2n, Wi is the weight into xi input plus V is the bias term. Next layer is the output layer. So the output layer of the multilayer perceptron produce the final prediction or output of the network, and the number of neurons in the output layer depend on the task being performed, and each neuron in the output layer receives the input from the neurons in the last hidden layer and applies an activation functions, and these activation function usually different form of the used in the hidden layers and produce the final output value or predictions. Now next is a gradient descent. So basically gradient descent is an optimization algorithm that is basically used for minimizing the minimize the function or loss functions, and it iteratively updates parameter in the opposite direction of the gradient of the functions. So the basic formula is the gradient descent is theta of t plus 1 equal to theta of t minus learning parameter eta delta j of theta of t. So where theta represent the model parameters, learning rate eta present the learning rate parameter, and delta j of theta is the gradient of the loss functions. So basically gradient descent is a three types. Batch gradient descent, so basically used for the entire data set to compute the gradient. Next is the stochastic gradient descent, use a single random sample per update. Now next is a mini batch gradient descent, as the name suggests, uses small batches of the sample for each update. Now next is the delta rule or withdrawal rule. So delta rule is a specific case of the gradient descent used in the single layer perceptron for the supervised learning, and it minimizes the squared error by the adjusting weight using the formula delta wi equal to learning parameter eta equal to bracket में d minus y equal to into x of y. So basically delta of wi is the change in the weight, learning rate, eta is the learning rate, d is the desired output, y is the actual output, and xi is the input feature. And it is a primarily used in a linear network, and it is a foundation for the more advanced learning rules in the neural networks. Now our next topic is the multi-layer networks. So multi-layer network is a network made up of multiple layers of nodes and edges, and each layer can represent the different types of interconnections such as the social, circle, operation mode, or temporal instance. So why are multi-layer networks are useful? Because they capture more detail about the complex systems such as social structure, transportation system, and metabolic networks. And also they can categorize multiple types of interconnections, and that are possible with a traditional monolayers network, and also be used to study how one network in a work impacts the formation of another network. So multi-layer networks have two types, basically multiple networks and interconnected networks. So multiple networks is a type of multi-layer network where interlayer edges can only connect nodes that represent the same action in a different layer. An interconnected network, a type of multi-layer network where state nodes are interconnected by interlayer edges. Now next is the backpropagation algorithm. So backpropagation algorithm is basically a powerful algorithm of deep learning in which minimizing the loss of the through the cost functions or weight functions. So backpropagation is basically used to train artificial neural network, particularly feed-forward neural, and it works iteratively minimizing the cost function by adjusting weight and biases. So in backpropagation network, reducing loss by following the error gradient, and backpropagation often utilize optimization algorithm like gradient descent, stochastic gradient descent algorithm, and the algorithm compute the gradients using the chain rule from the calculus, allowing it to effectively negative complex layer in the neural network to minimize the cost function. Here the picture of the backpropagation network. Inputs are given, some hidden layers are given, and output layer, and these are interconnected, and all these layers are interconnected to each other, and in backpropagation basically used for compute the loss function, yeah, minimizing the cost function. So in backpropagation network, first we compute the feed forward mode, all the layers, and then back propagate, then minimize the all the loss function, actual weight, and target output. So so now the backtrack the perform the input layer. So why back propagation important? The first is efficient weight update, because it computes the gradient of loss function with respect to each weight using the chain rule, making it possible to update weight efficiently. Yes. Now second is scalability. So backpropagation algorithm scales when two networks with multiple layers and complex architecture, making deep learning feasible. Now third is automated learning. Backpropagation, the learning process are automated, and the model can adjust and it's optimize its performance. Now our next topic is generalization. Generalization because basically refers to the ability of trained model to accurately predict outcomes on new unseen data that is likely but not identical to the data it was trained on the essentially, and it's the capacity to apply learned patterns from the training data to the new situations, demonstrating the model understanding of underlying relation rather than simplifying memorizing the training examples. Now, what is the factors affecting in generalization? Basically, model complexity. So, a model that is too complex for the given data can lead to overfitting and poor generalization. Training data size, a larger and more diverse training data usually improves generalization. And regularization techniques like L1 or L2 regularization can help prevent overfitting and improve generalization by penalizing over complex models. Now, our last topic is the SOM algorithm and its variants. So SOM is also known as a self-organizing map or coherent map or SOM. And basically it is a type of artificial neural network which is also inspired by the biological models of the neuron system from the 1970s, and it follows the unsupervised learning approach and trained in network through a computative learning algorithm. And basically SOM is used for clustering and mapping or dimensity reduction techniques to map dimensional data on lower dimensions, which allow people to reduce complex problem for easy interpretation. And SOM has basically two layers, one of the input layer and other is the output layer. So basically the architecture of the SOM is a input layer and output layer, and weights are given. That's all. Thank you.